Hello there. Have you ever been interested in some of the history of just Mac computers, how they work, how computers in general work, why we use them for music? Well, this is going to be extremely helpful for you. This is some of the intro topics for the basic computer skills for musicians class I teach each semester. In it, we learn, well, like I said, a bit about how computers work, why we use Macs and other devices for a lot of music most of the time, some of the history. We'll be making some music all throughout the semester and really just diving into this platform so that way you can keep exploring and learning and know what's going on whenever you're out and about in the industry having to be functional. So this video is going to go through the first few topics of the semester. Again, this is probably going to be the first maybe week and a half of classes all together there. So I'm going to go through all of the big points. I'm intending this to be a resource for the enrolled students to be able to come back, refer to things, almost like a little study guide to help out. That being said, super useful for, whoever might find this and be useful. As that's my goal, at least. So good information here. Nothing's going to be super in depth. The purpose of this course is to start off as kind of a ground level for everything else that happens in the program here. So only thing before I go into the actual content is that I have a separate video already that deep dives into some of these first few things. I was a little lazy and just threw all of this stuff into one set of slides for my first few weeks of classes. I already have a dedicated video for the course introduction and procedures, but that gets a little specific to the college and the enrolled students there. So I've separated that out and I've made it just a unlisted video in their Canvas module. So I'm just going to briefly skim through the first few slides that are all about course information and procedures. Just we don't really need to hop into it. So the first few things, is just like when the class meets, different rules for the lab, materials that you need, the different topics we're going to cover throughout the semester. I've got right here. We're starting right on the history, functionality of not only the Mac operating system, but also just computers in general. How do you interact with a computer, specifically for making music, but a little bit of everything as well. It's a good skill to have from there. Then for students just referring back to this, I'll give you these slides through our Canvas, but you can get links to all the stuff as well right from the slides. So let's actually get into the part that everyone really would care about, and that is the introduction to Mac computers. So the first thing I want to ask all of my current enrolled students is what kind of computer experience do you have? I kind of tailor this based off of what the students already know coming into the course. Like if most of them are already, Mac wizards and know how to do all the stuff, we can really shorten this out. But if no one has interacted with a Mac before, or even just computers, we gotta start from square one. I want to make sure that everyone has kind of the base starting level. So this may not be the most useful if you've used Macs for years and know what's going on, but if you've never checked them out before, I think you're in the right spot. Okay. So the first thing that we're going to look at is just a timeline of Apple. Apple being the people who make these devices. I'm not going to go through the entire timeline that I've got linked here. We'll do that in class. I'm just hitting the big points in today's recording. So starting back in 1976, Apple was founded broadly to sell their Apple One computer. Jobs, Wozniak, and the others are kind of the main known people for that. Others were involved. Again, I'm kind of doing the big overview because I want to get into the technical stuff. Apple II came out a little bit later and it became extremely popular as a microcomputer. Before this, computers were a bit more distributed. You can think of a microcomputer as kind of like a normal like desktop computer now, where you've got the the screen. It's all like local right at your device. It could even be built into a single unit, like a lot of the Mac computer iMacs are. But back then, beforehand, you'd have your dedicated like computer room, and that'd be the room for the computer because they were big. And then people would be able to access the computer through different terminals. So it was very spread out. The microcomputer, much smaller, kind of a all-in-one unit. That took off to the point where Apple was there was an IPO. It went publicly traded. I think it was $22 per share. There's a random tidbit there in 1980, and then Steve Jobs started to head up that Macintosh project, that being their main line of computers. In 1984, the first Macintosh, or Mac, was released for a whopping $2,500. Again, that's in 1984 money, so these are not cheap devices. Like they are and always have been more expensive. The idea being they want to kind of cultivate this premium experience that we'll talk about. And then there's other reasons as well. But again, we'll talk about it as we go. Right around the turn to the 1990s, Apple ended up suing Microsoft because of a lot of similarities between their operating systems. They ended up losing the case for all of that, but one of the things that made Macs really stand out at the time was their mostly graphic interface. I mean, early ones were still the text-based, but a lot of computers still had that text-based interface or really, really poor graphic interfaces, and Macs for a while at least were kind of a step ahead of that. If you've seen versions of old operating systems from the 90s, things like that, Mac was usually a little more refined, easy to work with. By the time by the time of Windows 95, getting into XP times, that really wasn't as much of a advantage, at least in my opinion. So by that point, things had kind of caught up, but for a while, Apple devices were a bit further ahead. The iMac, as we know it today, was first released in 1993. Again, that being the kind of more modern, all-in-one. From there, I realized I have a typo. It's not the Fist Apple Store. It's the first Apple Store. Was created in 2001, same year as Mac OS 10.0 or OS 10 is with the X there. And the original iPod all came out in that year. Which again, it was a lot of developments happening at the same time. Mac OS 10 is kind of what a lot of the current operating system for Mac is based off of. It was kind of their big one, and for a while, we'd have 10.1, 10.2, 10 point. I think it got all up to like 15 or something before they finally started updating to other numbers. I think the current one is. I gotta look. Here it is. Just right there. 26.2 is what I've got installed on my device. So again, they're no longer on 10. They've moved to different numbers, but for a long time it was just 10 point whatever version. In 2007, the iPhone and Apple TV released. A few years later, the iPad came out. I think in 2011, Steve Jobs died from cancer. Some things have changed since then, but those are kind of the big categories, just things to be aware of, at least for this class. This is not a history of, oh, good, look how amazing Apple is kind of class, but you should at least know some of the big things where it, things came from, the items that we'll be using, stuff like that. So again, a lot of people nowadays use an iPhone or a similar smartphone. The iPhone was kind of the one that really took off and started that whole revolution. Same thing with streaming as well. It wasn't unheard of, but kind of the whole point of Apple TV was you could have all of your movies and shows and stuff there, and you play it. And then the iPad basically started off like big iPhone that isn't phone, but really took off with the tablet space for the smaller, more portable, affordable devices. All right. Some things that you should probably know about the Mac operating system. So it's designed to be, user-friendly and intuitive. That's kind of the goal. again, Apple is usually trying to sell premium experiences. Is kind of how they advertise it. So the idea is that pretty much anyone could sit down at the computer, and if even if they don't immediately know, they could figure it out relatively simply. This does mean that the operating system generally has less direct access to, like, or I should say, as the user, you have less direct access to the operating system compared to other things. Like in Windows, you can much more easily go in and start adjusting, settings and firmware, what we call the low level stuff, the things that it's a little more closer to the ones and zeros and the integrated chips in the device. It's a little more abstracted than other operating systems. Again, this was a really big deal in the kind of, I'll say, the 80s through the 2000s. Again, most modern operating systems have that GUI, that GUI graphic user interface that kind of abstracts from, like I said, those ones and zeros and those text-based commands that were, again, really common for most of computer history. Again, the graphic user interface is relatively new compared to what we've had before. But again, that was kind of how it's designed. It's a integrated experience. It is less compatible, and I'm speaking broadly for things like gaming, a lot of programming uses, stuff of that nature that need that really low level access for a lot of stuff. And there's very specific ways for the programs to interact with the operating system here that are not as universal as some other operating systems have. So again, it does make it a little harder to develop things. But it is built out of a version of Unix, which the real short version is one of the kind of oldest and best supported operating systems that's kind of more or less still in use today. A lot of things are built out of it. So there's, again, some similarities between different things, but it's by this point especially has become its own thing. It does have some good kind of built-in security as well. It's not like perfectly resistant to things, but usually you don't have to worry too much about viruses and malware when you're using Macs. Again, I would say definitely, err on the side of caution still. That's just good 21st century computer procedures there. But, usually it's less of a problem on Macs. The Mac operating system is also designed to work just on Apple devices. So like you can't load this up on a Chromebook or a Asus or your Windows desktop, things like that. At least not normally, and not without a lot of headaches and loss of just performance. So again, it's designed to work with Apple, and that's part of the reason the devices are a little more expensive, is because Apple is creating the hardware and the software, whereas Microsoft is just creating the software side of it, and then they license out their Windows and all their stuff to the people making the computers. So on that side, they're able to focus on those things and get those individual prices down. So like the computer manufacturers have all of that lined up, whereas Apple is doing all of it more or less in-house there. So again, the big plus of that, though, is because the operating system is designed to work directly with the Apple devices, it makes it fast and responsive, pretty efficient. Again, it's a very tightly integrated ecosystem. And then broadly speaking, just in terms of market share, Windows is a lot more common and on a lot more devices, but you tend to see a lot more Mac stuff for creative things, whether it be editing videos or music or images, whatever that kind of stuff. Macs are really, really common for, and there's a variety of reasons for that. We'll touch on some of them, but we're not going to deep dive into all of that right here because everyone's a little bit different. Maybe no matter what, you just absolutely hate Macs and you want to use Windows stuff. Nothing inherently wrong with that. Your music isn't going to be worse because of that, at least in most cases that I could think of. But yes, it's a lot of it is up to preference. this is going to be the part where normally I'm going to just take a little pause. The students have an assignment here, so I'm probably going to break up this recording into two separate little videos. So I'll pause this one here and create a second one for the software.